All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Jinhua Zhao. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum, organized by the MIT Mobility Initiative. Today, we have a very specific topic focusing on the transit technology, on the payment and benefit innovation. I really thank Dr. Anson Stewart, the Deputy Director of the MIT Transit Lab, for helping design and moderate today's session. I also thank Ruth Miller, Avital Shavit, Lilly Shoup to join us as the panelists. Right. I'll most likely invite Anson to moderate session, but just to motivate today's discussion, interim payment system, we will think we should have solved the problem a long time ago, right? From cash, check, credit card, mobile payment, QR code, facial recognition, fingerprint, we have all sorts of technology, right? But of course, if you use public transit, you will know that in many cities, we haven't solved that problem. So it's a technology innovation issue, it's the industry monopoly issue. How the ticket technology also constrained our fare product and fare constraint that it needed to enable. So in short, what if we don't have to think about paying when we use public transit, right? So just to warm up the audience, in the chat, I will invite everybody to type your organization, city, and the local time as we before, right? So I will do MIT, Cambridge, 12 now. But in addition, I invite everybody to type in the transit card name in your city, right? So for me, I will see Charlie card, MBTA.
Got a pretty wide range of transit card brands. There's a certain subset of us, I think, who may be collectors here and who may be reaching out to people for a few of the rarer ones.
Indeed, yeah. So let me pass the phone to Dr. Anson Stewart as a president.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jinhua, and thanks everyone for joining today. This is the first of what I hope will be a kind of an ongoing regular series in the MIT Mobility Forum on transit tech. And we've decided to start today with something that can be, in some ways, literally a barrier to entry for people in terms of transit. So we've got a great panel here to talk about some recent innovations in transit payment technology, and also how we connect that to benefits, either kind of societal benefits or more limited employer-provided benefits. So I'll have the panel jump right in. Our first panelist is Lilly Shoup, who is a managing director at Rebel Group. Works with a number of colleagues, I think, who have worked in, say, places like London, where the MIT Transit Lab also has extensive experience going back to 2012 with the launch of contactless payment there. Just checked the latest stats. Contactless payment now over 3 million journeys a day in London. Anyways, Lilly has also had a range of other experiences in the public and private sectors, including at USDOT, Lyft, and Nelson Nygaard, and is going to talk us through a little bit on some of the latest that's been going on, especially in California. Go ahead, Lilly.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to join you all today, and really looking forward to the discussion and the opportunity to share the virtual stage with two of my favorites in the space, Avital and Ruth. So thanks very much for the warm welcome. As mentioned, my name is Lilly Shoup. I am a director at Rebel. My team of about 25 folks around the world has a background and experience leading public transit systems, and specifically around fare payments. So all the ways that people pay for accessing the bus or the train. As mentioned, my background and many of the folks colleagues I have and folks on my team have worked both in the public and private sector side in mobility services, and also in mobility technologies as well. Rebel is based in Rotterdam, where I'm joining you from today, and excited to bring that global perspective to this conversation, since how people pay for the bus or train is relevant all around the world. One of my favorite projects that I've worked on throughout my career is for the past 4 years supporting the California Integrated Travel Project, or CAL-ITP. CAL-ITP is an initiative at the state level in California by Caltrans, along with rail and transit operators in the state, to bring together the collective ability of public transit and rail across the state with three main initiatives. So first is to simplify the way that people can pay for accessing transit services, bringing real-time data standards and transit information to passengers as they're trying to navigate the system. And then improving the experience of qualifying for and then receiving your discounts that you may be eligible for when you ride public transit in California. Ultimately, the goal for the California Integrated Travel Project, or CAL-ITP, is using mobility and access to opportunities in your community to increase social inclusion and equity and affordability. So by allowing people an easier option for paying for mobility and the opportunity to try it for paying your $1 or $2 bus or train fare, you can build the habit of using digital payments for paying for everyday items. Then, sort of moving up the ladder, you can increase the ability for somebody to receive benefits by proving that they are, for example, a senior or a veteran, using those benefits to then get rewarded for taking sustainable travel options. And from there, building more credit and trust through financial inclusion, being recognized in the financial ecosystem. So as somebody like me who has worked their whole career in the mobility and transit space, it is a really eye-opening way of viewing the opportunities that public transit can unlock, not just the access to opportunities in communities, but the financial inclusion ways for paying and getting actually able to pay for those opportunities that you might be not able to afford today. So in that first bucket of making transit as easy as buying a cup of coffee, the state of California has said that the state role in this space can be facilitating the purchasing of fare payments systems for transit. So the state of California has pre-purchased or set up a state purchasing schedule for the hardware and software needed to begin accepting bank cards or open loop payments on transit and rail across the state. These contracts that set up at the state level are available to any transit agency across the US, so you do not need to be located in California to be able to take advantage of them. And then in addition, the state is providing technical assistance and resources to be able to access those contracts. So these are resources available to help transit agencies more quickly be able to start accepting open loop payments or bank cards on their system without having to go through a multi-year procurement or developing customized design specifications or any of the other sort of fare collection system processes that many agencies have really struggled with in the US. Beyond that, we recognize, and the state is very concerned about ensuring that everyone has a way to pay for the system. So not just making sure that there are validators on board buses and trains, but that everyone who's interested in paying with something other than cash has an option to do so. So the state has been working with banks and credit unions, the Bank On Coalition, and other issuers to make sure that there are options for folks who are interested in a digital payment option, but may not currently have one. In addition, working with folks like LA Metro, we've been looking at using prepaid debit cards and other digital payment tools to actually distribute government benefits for mobility. So in addition to making sure that everybody has a way to pay, in some instances, having money on that is also a barrier. So the state has been working towards using digital tools for financial inclusion in that way as well. Finally, I wanted to just speak quickly to the last component, which is transit discounts. So many folks in the US are eligible for a discounted fare when they board their bus or train. And today, the process for getting that discount can be very complicated and cumbersome for many riders. Many transit agencies in the US require a rider to show up in person to a customer service center, present things like a doctor's note or a tax return to prove their income. And those information are then scanned and then held by the transit agency. So it's a cumbersome process for riders to have to go through. It can also be a huge barrier for transit agencies to manage all of that data and keep it secure. So the state of California, working with the California Department of Technology, as well as login.gov at the federal level, has been working on a seamless automated system that can be an additional option for transit agencies to allow riders to qualify for those discounts more seamlessly. The Cal ITP benefits client uses a federated identity system to attach a discount, for example, that you are a senior over 65, to a bank card or credit card that allows riders to receive that discount anywhere and anytime they tap that card in the state of California. So it allows a rider to be able to receive that discount in different transit agencies that are each, have their own requirements, but that the rider can then use the same credential they used to pay for transit services to pay for anything else. So these are just a couple of the innovations from the state of California that I wanted to highlight today. I will say that you can reach the Cal ITP program at any time at hello@calitp.org. Also would recommend signing up for the mailing list, where every 2 weeks we send out information about transit technology, innovation, and payments. So definitely another resource to look up there. And with that, I will pass the baton to my next panelist.
Great. Thanks so much, Lily. While Avi's getting the screen share up, just one reaction that I think in a lot of debates we've seen about kind of subsidies for transit, rider subsidies for transit, there's been this idea of should it be place-based or person-based? For example, in Boston, a number of routes have been piloted as free routes. Is that the best from an equity perspective? And I think sometimes the argument has been, not only is it a cumbersome process for someone to sign up for a benefit, but that can actually be a pretty undignified thing. And so maybe some of the technology you're showing here offers a way to kind of break that, where people don't need to go through that cumbersome process and may open up new ways to think about person-based subsidies or discounts. So something to keep in mind.
Definitely, and actually an excellent segue to Avital, who's thinking about just those things.
Great. So Avital Shavit is a senior director at LA Metro's Office of Innovation, has been working on a range of projects across LA County with LA Metro for 17 years, I think, and we actually overlapped briefly at LA Metro just over 10 years ago. So looking forward to hearing the latest from LA.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Lily, for that great kind of overview. Since we have a short time to give a presentation, I'm gonna just give two things why I'm passionate and interested in this subject of payments and access to our transportation systems. Number one, there's a big event that's coming in less than 4 years to Los Angeles, which is the 2028 Olympics. And on the left-hand side, in 1984, my sister went to the Olympics with my dad and left me behind. I was a little young. So I want to make sure for the 2028 Olympics that everybody has great access to the Olympics, not only the spectators, but also the people that do get left behind, right? Because they're too young or their mom's caring for their kids, as it was my mom in my case, right? That everybody has access to great transportation. That's something that motivates me, and I want to go to the Olympics. Maybe I'll get to go this time. And this is actually a picture from last night. I went to a Pasadena Arts Center, which is a really fine design thinking policy school. They have a really great graduate school in transportation design studies, which I'll plug. That we've recruited a few students from to come work with us at Metro. And this is the perception from the students of our transit fare system. Not mine, full disclosure, but that maybe our current access system that we currently have in place, which is called TAP, which is a closed loop QR RFID card, maybe doesn't serve everybody in the right way. Maybe just based upon the students' perception of that we are techno benevolence, right? That wasn't the greatest word, but just a thought. So what are we doing about that? one of the really cool projects that I and my team are working on, really with inspiration from Lilly and Cal ITP's work on payments, and kind of connecting them to our existing kind of banking rails and using existing banking technology, not reinventing the wheel, using the technology that's right in front of us, which is our payment system, to give more people access to transportation in a more equitable, seamless, and maybe a more dignified way, giving them more choice, particularly when it comes to subsidies for low-income individuals. So what we did, and we're actually going into our, about to go into our 12th, we're in our 12th month of a 12-month phase 1 pilot, where we gave 1,000 people in South LA $150 on a prepaid debit card for a year, so $1,800. And these individuals were all low income and all qualify for our existing low fares Easy Life program. It's our subsidy program. And they got a card which they could use on 8 different transportation services. And they could pick how they use that budget, right? We're not saying you have to use it for a bike, and it has to be an e-bike, or you have to use it on an EV car sharing, or you have to use it for public transit. They get to have that choice so they can serve their unique transportation needs when they need it. And so, people are like, what can you use the card for? So the beauty of this is we use the existing banking rails. We're not inventing new technology. We're really just using the technology that exists within the payment networks that we use for our airline miles, right? And our Costco cards. So this card was limited to 8 merchant category codes: ride hailing, taxi, public bus and rail, commuter rail, Amtrak, intercity bus, car share, car rental, EV car share, the city of Los Angeles has. And this project, I should not skim over this, is in partnership with the city of Los Angeles. They got a really generous grant from the state of California, from the California Air Resources Board. This project and this pilot of a mobility wallet is part of a greater universal basic mobility project that the city of LA is running that includes many other components. It also included bike shops, which is something that I'm really interested in because I used to work in kind of the active transportation sphere. And this idea that you can give somebody subsidies on a card and they can go to any bike shop, really anywhere potentially in the world, but we limited it to the United States, and use the prepaid debit card to buy a bike or buy a helmet or buy a lock, right, to help them get around. And we actually saw a lot of people using it, not surprisingly. We actually saw more people using it at bike shops than on shared, or equivalent to about at bike shops than shared scooters. And we actually saw more people using it at bike shops, making purchases at bike shops, than on bike share. So that's kind of interesting from like maybe equity standpoint. So, I don't think I Lilly kind of touched on the why we do this, but really getting ready for the future of technology of open loop, but also wanting to look at how we might provide a one access point, one card, right, to rule them all, and how we might kind of create a wallet that maybe is a replacement for a personal auto, or maybe enables people to not have to purchase additional cars. We also, in LA County, we have some of the highest rates of cash usage on our transit system. About 40%, more than 40% of boardings are cash. And that's probably because we have a large percentage of the population that rides transit that's low income or very low income. And having to lock up funds on a closed loop card is actually even more kind of financially constraining from them. And when we ask people, why don't you use a tap card? They say it's because I don't have the liquid to put on that card and lock it up, right? So that's another reason why use a mobility wallet, why look to a different technology that's more flexible for people to spend. Since we're nearing the end of this first phase, we're looking to do a phase 2 starting this summer because we have another generous grant from the state of California and from our regional planning organization, SCAG. And we also maybe even have a phase 3 in partnership with Caltrans, looking at how we might connect it to the highway system. And I think that's a question we'll talk more about. But we're really, seeing, a little over half of the trips purchased are still on public transit. But, about, 40% of the trips are purchased on ride hailing services or taxi and also access services. And then we see a sliver of, trips on Private buses, Greyhound and Flixbus, bike shops, Amtrak, Metrolink, shared scooters, and people reporting that this ability to have flexibility across modes within a subsidy program is really enables them to get to jobs and healthcare. And personal stories like a mother told us that now they can go to an exercise class because they have this additional transportation option. And if you think about, like, I always think of, going to exercise class always pays its dividends, because we know preventative health, right, always pays dividends in terms of healthcare, right? But people don't have the transportation to get them to that exercise, right, in an equitable manner. I will just spend a second on, there's a question later on that we want to talk about, is how does this connect, maybe, we're testing mobility wallets with low-income individuals, a more flexible way to give people transportation subsidies that need it the most. But what about getting people out of their cars, maybe using a mobility wallet as an incentive to get people to shed personal autos? And so we did another pilot using the same card vendor that we're using, True Cash right now, where we paid them not to drive. And this was in Santa Monica. We did a randomized control trial. I can talk more about it at another time, but the bottom line is using these kind of payment cards and paying people to park their car for 5 weeks. We saw that people stopped driving their second car more and reduced their VMT. So these types of payment solutions have more than just giving transit subsidies, right, to people who need it the most. We also can use them as a tool to reduce potentially personal autos, the purchase of new autos, and driving in general. So they can be used for both, kind of like an incentive of both sides of the coin. And I'll stop there and hand it over to Ruth.
Thanks so much. And just to introduce Ruth, Ruth is a product manager with over a decade of experience in trip planning and transit tech. She currently manages product and partnerships at Jawnt, which is a Philadelphia-based commuter benefits company. Ruth has worked previously with the MBTA, Cal ITP, Lyft, and Apple. She's MIT class of 2007, but went to Berkeley for her city planning degree.
I appreciate the but, like, go Bears. They're still, they still do a lot of transportation over there. I'm having trouble resuming my share. I don't think people can see my screen yet.
Not quite yet.
Let's try one more time. Oh no, I don't know which of my schools that I went to this reflects the most poorly on.
Let me see if I can bring them up from my side for you.
Thank you.
If not, I have them up too.
I hit pause earlier and I will regret it for the rest of this session.
Lily, you said you had them up as well?
Thank you. Thank you, Lily. That's a friend. Thank you so much. All right. So hi, everyone. Perfect. I think I can remotely advance them. Let's not overthink it. Great. So hi, my name is Ruth Miller, proud MIT alum, very good at technology, and have gotten to work really more specifically in trip planning for a very long time, and had the pleasure of overlapping with Lily at Cal ITP. And that really opened my eyes post-COVID. Everyone's trying to figure out what can we do to avoid this fiscal cliff? How can we get people to ride? And it was, I think, for a lot of us, a very eye-opening experience. We've spent over 100 years building our cities around cars, and all of the systems and obstacles that we're trying to overcome now are going to require a diversity of tactics to address them. So there's no one easy solution, or some smart person would have done it already. So it's an honor and a privilege to be on this panel with folks who represent public and private sector working together to solve these problems that we all need to have solved. So thank you. Next up. And the hat that I'm wearing to work on this problem today is with a company called Jawnt. We're a third-party transit benefits provider, and I'm going to talk about the role of employers of the private sector in this very pan-sector challenge. So specifically, we work with employers or just really any large organization to distribute passes to their members. Next slide, please. And that has put us in great company with SEPTA. So if anyone's familiar with Philadelphia or Philadelphia lingo, Jawnt. Jawnt is a short walk, and Jawnt is a very Philly thing. And we are a very Philly company at our origin. And we're just very fortunate to be part of the initial rollout of the SEPTA Key Advantage Pass. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So SEPTA Key Advantage, go back one more, sorry, not quite ready, thanks, is an employer-based pass. So you can only receive it through an employer. It's an unlimited all access pass. If you were to buy an unlimited pass with the city of Philadelphia or with SEPTA, you would spend, I think it's a little over $200. Apologies to the SEPTA folks on the call, but this pass is available for roughly a 90% discount, which is pretty incredible. And it works on your existing key card. So you don't need a separate card to do it, which is of course very nice. Now, next slide, please. Lily, thank you for managing this.
I made it full screen. Did that mess it up?
I didn't change on my end, but if you could just move to the next slide. It's more pixels than I was able to do, so.
I got too clever myself. Hold on.
I can keep talking through that though. So
keep going.
Yeah, the details of the SEPTA Key Advantage program, I suspect it would be interesting to this group. So it launched, there we go. It launched in May 2022, coinciding with a citywide mandate for employers to provide transit benefits. So just great collaboration across the public sector there. It was originally limited to much larger companies, ones with over 500 employees. It has been rolled out across the board. They're now talking with multifamily residential programs, employers of all sizes, all sectors, eds and meds, we like to call them, universities and hospitals, also being very interesting. And of course, free transit is a lower barrier than even subsidized transit. So they're working with employers to advocate for subsidizing this pass beyond its initial cost. And it's being administered through a third party, Jawnt. It's always nice when technology can be used to support a human-driven process, which is what we're trying to do here. So Jawnt, or in this case, just a third party, let's focus on that, supports determining eligibility, managing enrollment, handling payments. That's something that many agencies prefer to do differently, some do in-house, and participation has been great. This is a chart showing the number of employers or organizations, let's say organizations that are participating, which that's the direction you want to see. That's approaching that hockey stick. And in general, 70% of people who are eligible for this program do load something onto their card. And then of those, 3/4 actually take a trip at least once a month, which is what we want to see. Next, please. And this, I think this is, again, something this group would probably enjoy. The way this system was priced, it's not hard to just offer a discount, right? Like we know cheaper is better, subsidies can drive participation, but the process that the SEPTA staff coordinated to engage the business community, to engage the city of Philadelphia, to come up with a price that felt fair, that's the real accomplishment of this process. And they came up with one. It's always a balance between complexity and simplicity, and how do you make everyone feel like they're participating and that they know how to participate and that they can. And they came up with one that's, I would say personally, a little more on the complex side, but the people that are participating are happy with it. And that's the only metric that actually matters. So it's based on an expected value of usage. There's an introductory price for the first 6 months. Our organizations, employers pay based on their eligible population. You're considered eligible if you are full-time, if you're not qualified for a senior unlimited pass already, and if you are working full-time within the SEPTA boundary. And then they start you off for your first 6 months at $160, roughly 26 and change per employee per month. And then they recalculate that price every 6 months based on the cost of, or based on the average revenue per line. So this is where it starts to get a little tricky. And again, I can't say enough nice things about the team that SEPTA has put together to communicate this, and just the number of events and in person. And it's not a thing that can exist without support from the business community. And that's what they worked really hard to get. And obviously got to plug eConsult for doing all the difficult math on this. Next slide, please. So now that was 2022, looking to the present day, who has participated in this? And we can kind of assume people or organizations that are civic minded, that want to do the right thing because that's a thing that is incentivized internally for them to do, no brainer. Campus-based ones, not a surprise there really either. If you've got a lot of people moving to one little area and you don't want to deal with parking, subsidizing their transit or helping them get more affordable transit is going to be a good selling point. I personally have been fascinated to see the enthusiastic participation from shift-based employers. I think this is a group that's often not really considered. They're not really the primary audience for a lot of the technology and processes that are designed, but they have been very enthusiastic about this. And I also want to plug on the bottom right here, the City of Philadelphia's Zero Fare program, not to compare or contrast with LA's incredible program, but it's an unlimited transit pass for just for SEPTA for 25,000 low-income residents in the city with automatic eligibility. It's a 2-year pilot. It's wonderful stuff. And Jawnt is also very pleased to have any role in participating and supporting that. Next slide, please. Unsurprisingly, this has been a tremendously popular program. I don't have the privilege of working in Philly. I live in Boston, but I get to hear my coworkers that just run into folks on the street and overhear them talking about their SEPTA card. And the word of mouth has driven participation by employers in a great way. And positive press, this is a good story. Everyone loves a good story. One more slide, please. High level takeaways. We got to collaborate with SEPTA. They were generous in sharing participation data and usage, anonymized, obviously. And we were able to publish a TRB paper on this. And the larger takeaways that we got were just work with your anchor institutions. There's no magic number that will make sense. The magic number is the one that your partners can participate in. So a program like this that's designed to enable participation from the business community, you have to do it with the business community and treat them as real partners. So working with those then created knock-on effects. Second one, not really a surprise. The more money you invest in this project, the more successful it's going to be. So cost sharing, subsidies for employees. It's easier for employers to participate. We can make it even easier for their employees to participate by subsidizing those costs. Reducing the technical hurdles, having an easy to use enrollment experience. We've heard from other agencies and other cities about spreadsheets from hell. There are no spreadsheets from hell in this. That should be the last thing people are worried about, and just simplifying the process as much as possible. So easy numbers, except for that pricing slide, easy numbers, easy enrollment, easy data flows. We just want to get people on the bus. I believe, Lilly, that might be the last one. And if anyone has any questions, here's my contact information. And that bit.ly link is a shortener for a very detailed description of how SEPTA's program is designed and priced and calculated if anyone is interested in more information. Thank you all so much for your time. And Lilly for emceeing.
Thanks to all of our panelists. This has been great to see the progress being made here. I know we've got a ton of questions from the audience, but I'll take a couple minutes here just to get the questions and discussions started. This idea of universal basic mobility was mentioned, and I wonder if you all could say a little bit more about that, and a related concept, which is in scholarship around transport justice, there's been an argument for universal sufficient access, that people should be able to have, some baseline minimum level of access to opportunities they need to thrive. Can you say a little bit more about how you're measuring how new mobility options and reduced barriers to mobility are helping achieve that access?
Avital, do you want to start, since your program is very tied to that?
Yeah, I mean, this idea of everyone should have a basic level of access to transportation, and particularly in a place that is very auto-oriented, like Los Angeles County, like even some of the more even some East Coast cities, right, that were built before the car, that have lots of suburbs that are now becoming less and less, that are becoming more and more auto-oriented. Making sure that people, particularly in transit deserts, right, have a minimum level of access to transportation that gets them where they need to go, when they need to go in a dignified way. That we are looking at what is the metric of universal basic mobility, and actually our CEO has challenged us. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean that you can get to all of your jobs within an hour? travel time, right, within LA County. Within LA County, there's some data that basically says, you can get to, thousands of job opportunities in a car in an hour, but you can only get to like 18. I think it's like in the teens percentage of those jobs if you take public transit, right? So your access to opportunity is substantially diminished if you only rely on the bus and train. Bus and train may get you some of those places, but maybe you need other modes to complete your trip, right? Or for certain times when you have to be at that 10 o'clock interview, or else you're not getting the job, right? And maybe you can't rely on the a transfer from 3 buses, right? That takes you 2 hours across the county. So yeah, I think we're in this process, and I think we're talking with other academic institutions like UCLA that are in our backyard, and UC Davis that's just a little bit further up north, and welcome the academic community to kind of dig into this, because I think I think conceptually there's lots of definitions out there, but there's definitely, my executives are coming to me like, well, what does that mean from a metric standpoint? How are we measuring that everybody gets universal basic mobility? And I'm like, we definitely have some thoughts, but I think it's still a question to be like, well, what does it actually mean? And what does that look like? I think choice has a lot to do with it, right? Giving people the choice and the power to say, like, right now, using a car to go get groceries because I have 3 kids that I need to take with me, or I need to be back in 15 minutes because I only have childcare until 5:30 and I have to be back home, right? I think those things are important to empowering people for choice. Lilly or Ruth, you have thoughts on universal basic mobility?
Yeah, yes, just I guess building on what you just said is, I think because Avital is a transit agency operating transit. From the state of California's perspective, their excitement is around using mobility and public transit as a moment or an opportunity for financial inclusion. So the interest is really in sort of broadening our definition and our understanding of equity and access beyond mobility, because this is the state of California, and thinking more about financial inclusion and getting people banked, and people who don't have a bank card access to using transit using a bank card can be an excellent first step towards building comfort and awareness about digital payment options that are available to folks. So I think Avital is sort of the describing universal basic mobility as an essential need for getting folks the access they need to move around their community. But that's also a moment that somebody could also become aware of other digital options that are available to them. So yes, and.
Thanks. Let me move on to another question, which is how are you, you mentioned kind of the vehicle miles traveled VMT reduction. How are you measuring either VMT reduction or carbon impact here? And I don't know if others have thoughts on, whether that's still an argument you're having to make.
Ruth, you wanna go first on this one?
I'm always happy to hear your answers, but I will make a short one. I appreciate how that is not a topic that we're having to deal with. I think in general, transit better than drive. And I've spent enough time in California to be very familiar with CEQA and having to be able to measure every possible impact and outcome. And I appreciate that so many of our partners, when asked, just say, we're getting people on the bus. That is the goal. And there's been some fascinating research published recently about, even if you're not, just like general operating efficiencies, getting more people riding transit is good for cities. And that is our objective.
Yeah, I would just add that for the state of California, the Air Resources Board, so the CARB, in their latest scoping plan, which is the state's plan to meet our climate goals, included a whole chapter, a whole annex on sustainable communities. And this topic about transit technology innovation was one of the 4 key pathways highlighted in that section. So removing barriers to people even becoming aware of where transit is in their community and removing barriers to getting on board the bus or the train is seen as an essential piece of meeting our greenhouse gas emissions targets. And Avital, I cut you off.
No, that an important note. You know, the way that I think we see, you know, payment innovations and, you know, a wallet, right, for transportation access. And somebody in the chat said it shouldn't be a one card, and I agree, not one card, because I actually want it in one place, right? I want it in this thing, or something that I'm already carrying, right? So it's about how it kind of fits into the ecosystem of something that I'm already using. And maybe sometimes somebody wants a fingerprint, right? But that's another story, another topic for another day. Possibly not. But yeah, included in something that people are already using for payment. So more about unification, right? And streamlining. But also getting people banked. So I think this idea of, like, we know that there was a study about 10 years ago, and there actually isn't most recent data, but maybe Lilly has more data on this. Like in LA County, there was about 1 million people that are unbanked as of about 10 years ago. This is an older study from Pew Research. And, you know, this idea of getting people banked, I think, is important. VMT is interesting because from the study that we're doing with low-income individuals, right, they are actually maybe increasing some of their driving trips short term, right? From the data that we see for 12 months. I think the bigger question is, we know that in Los Angeles County, that's very car oriented, that if you are, you know, if you want to access all the things that you need to get opportunity, your household needs to really have a car. And that the threshold of when low income individuals purchase a car is actually really low. It's like a certain, it's still within what's considered low income, but it's like at a certain threshold. Like UCLA has some great data on this. And so if we can delay that financial outlay for a low income household to have to purchase another household car or their first household car, we know that that's a savings. And I think, and so the mobility wallet, even for low income individuals, that might actually be increasing some of their single occupancy trip making, because we consider taxis and ride hailing as single occupancy trips for when we do VMT and air quality analysis. I think that long term, and you know, we're going to do some post participant surveys and ask people, are you able to not have a car or postpone the purchase of a new car, right? And so I think looking at that, because we know that car ownership is linked to VMT and air pollution and driving miles traveled, right? And the more cars your households have, and higher income households drive more and create more vehicle miles traveled. So I think thinking about that, it's a long game for low income households. I think it's also using as an incentive to get mid-income and higher income households maybe to shed cars or to drive less. So I think we can we're basically experimenting with this idea of, you know, using banking rails as an incentive model and as this kind of seamless transportation wallet. So we can use that model, as I shared in this one car challenge, as an incentive. And I think we're thinking about how do we also link it to potentially congestion pricing in the future, right? Right now, LA County, LA Metro is currently studying this in a traffic reduction study, TRS, you can look it up. You know, New York is looking at this, Boston is looking at this, you know, the Bay Area has been tinkering and thinking about congestion pricing, right? So I think linking the two up, right, as from like an equity perspective, from like a holistic perspective, is also how you link it to vehicle miles traveled and air quality improvements.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I know the CARB scoping plan has really said, even with full you know, electrification mandates on vehicle sales, VMT is still a hugely important goal. But this complexity of, you know, maybe a little bit of short-term increase in VMT to help people access opportunities, and then also kind of delay or postpone a bigger step change in VMT. Really interesting. A lot of cool research underway on that. Just really quickly, to scale this up, kind of procurement challenges, any lessons learned on the role of interoperable data or open standards on helping get over some procurement hurdles?
Wow, we have 3 minutes, and that could be a whole seminar on procurement, Avital and I's favorite subject. I think that as an industry, the transit industry has done a terrible job of taking advantage of global standards that exist for all the other industries and applying them to ours. Instead, we like to create our own. In many cases, that's perfectly acceptable because we have transit vehicle needs or transit, specific purposes. But payments and how people pay for things should not be unique to transit, but be part of the global payments ecosystem. And those standards already exist and are used around the world. And so I think that if you use those standards and you can have access to vendors and suppliers that provide validators for transit agencies and other payment devices all over the world, you can simplify your procurement requirements and procurement writing processes. And you also have access to a broader pool of vendors and better pricing because it's not transit specific pricing, but people who are providing those services or devices for other industries as well. Lots more to say on that. And that's one of the hypotheses and theories behind the California model, where the state is basically providing that procurement support on behalf of all of the transit agencies in the US and saying, we don't need to do this agency by agency, but we could have a greater level of aggregation and therefore get better pricing models and better support. Lots
Great.
more to say. Obviously, I'm not passionate about the topic at all.
Thanks. Thanks again for all the insights, Bhuvan. Thank you for tracking the very active chat. We'd love to hear kind of what's top of mind there.
Yeah, I hope I've done a good job of tracking that. And to the discussion point just now on data standards. So Rob had actually asked a question: how do you get multiple providers to agree to put customer value and simplicity over their proprietary concern? We're seeing that right here in Boston. The Kendall Square Red Line station has the tap to pay kiosks, but they've not been activated because what I've been told is the fare machines do not sync with these. So if you get a ticket from the fare machine, and if they activate the credit card machines, you'll not be able to pass through this and the other. So, just a very, very key point on why having these data standards, standardized across the country probably would have prevented such types of, investments and delays in activation. A couple of questions on Jawnt. So I'm looking at you, Ruth. So have the SEPTA or similar programs generated any surprising insights about customer use adoption? And have these led to service changes, as in different hours to accommodate shift workers? And another question from Sylvia is that are contractors rather than regular employees also eligible for these benefits?
Both, all good questions. The question about service changes is a great one. And if I get invited back, Anson, if we do this again next year, I'll have a good answer for it. I know it's still new enough, but I am certain that's something that they're paying attention to. And the contractor one is, unfortunately, they are not. So this system is based on the federal tax code's transit fringe benefits pre-tax. So for folks who are not familiar with the US federal tax code, if you are a full-time employee in the US, you are allowed to deduct $315, this number changes every year due to inflation, for use on parking for the purpose of commuting to get to work, another $315 for transit plus van pool. They're kind of shared out of that pot, again, for the purpose of getting to work. So a lot of these, or all of these commuter benefit requirements are based on taking advantage of those systems. I'd be very curious to know what the rules are in other countries. And that, unfortunately, then excludes contractors and part-time and other groups. So unfortunately, no, this particular solution is geared very closely to employers. But the SEPTA Key Advantage program, I mentioned they're talking with residential groups. The low-income fare program with the city of Philadelphia isn't SEPTA Key Advantage, but it's similar. I would say the employer program is often an easy topic to get people started about because, hey, who doesn't want to have the business community take on more of their fair share of using this infrastructure that was largely designed to support them, right? Like that's why downtowns exist. So it's a great initial conversation. And then once that hard work is done, and ideally there's some good rewards and benefits, then those discussion patterns and language can ideally be followed by quick discussion about low income, regular people that live in multifamily units, whatever the identity is that makes one part of a group that could be benefited by this.
Yeah, thanks for that. I want to move on to this question that Saul asked, and it's having to identify yourself as a low-income individual in your transit system in order to make transit affordable, go and qualify for a particular a scheme or a grant. It's inherently is it there could be some hesitancy there. Even in here, Mary Skelton Roberts, who's on the board of the MBTA, raised this concern that it's not the nicest thing to go and get this claim or this low pass card. So I'm just wondering. I'm a huge fan of the LA Mobility Wallet. So what sort of steps can be taken to reduce and remove these barriers in equity and.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that LA Metro recently have done that, and not our program, right? Our overarching, Office of Management and Budget and our fare groups have done that I think actually, try to minimize the barrier of identifying of applying for these programs, right? One of the things is we do self-attestation, so you don't have to provide any documentation that you're low income. You just have to self-identify and check a box that says, yes, I am in this income bracket, which is similar to what people do when they apply for a credit card or apply for a lot of other, middle and higher income, right? Like I get asked my income on a lot of things, right? When I apply for a mortgage, right? So I think leveling that, I think that has helped a lot. And our low income fare is easy program has exponentially grown because of that reducing the barrier. And there is a kind of like an audit process on the back end. And we basically modeled it off of the low income subsidy programs for utilities. I think that a few companies, public utility companies, have been running and had success with, right? So we do the same thing for the mobility wallet. It's just self-attestation, where you check a box, you say, I am low income, and you check a box on your income, right? So we found that, that helps. For our audit, this is a bigger policy question beyond my department, my agency, right? When we provide subsidies to people because they need it the most, we like to make sure that we're audit proof. There's lots of questions about terminal verified cards versus MCC code, and I'm curious, Lilly and Ruth, because this is my first time thinking a lot about that, right? That we have to be audit proof, and every program has to be audited, and we need to. We're going to get audited. All of our programs currently are funded by state grants. We're actually going to get into using some federal grants. So I think that's as long as our structure is the way it is, and there's somebody auditing the program and where the money is going, we're going to have to do some kind of. But I think self-attestation is the best we can do for now. Even better is some of the programs that Cal ITP and others are working on about, and that I've seen internationally, right? When you have I don't know if this is better or not, like you have a driver's license and you're identified already, or ID, right? And you're identified once as a certain income, and then it qualifies you for all these programs, and you don't have to even talk about it, or self-attest, right? And that would be a better process. We don't have that in place quite yet, but I don't know, Lilly, if you want to talk a little bit about that and what that could bring.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge or the issue of people qualifying for discounts when they go across multiple service providers. Think about the commuter rail to the transit agency, or multiple transit agencies in a region, or even if you're taking a bike share to the station, how that could work. Wouldn't it be nice if you could receive a senior discount or a student discount or a veterans discount across those different service providers in a way that doesn't require you to verify your identity and eligibility multiple times, but also, to the original point, doesn't stigmatize you by having to tap something special or have a low income ID card, but that you can pay the same way everyone else is paying. You are just charged less. So that's really the vision behind the discounted tool that I mentioned for California. And again, that relies on login.gov, which is a federated identity service where you aren't receiving the actual information, but it is privacy protective and a privacy first approach.
Great.
I'll put some more on that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, you're quite active in the chat. I saw that. So thanks for that. So Avi, you shared the data on the VMT usage. So Handlin had a question, regarding the randomized control trial that y'all did. So do y'all analyze the usage of the transit card data and transaction records, or do y'all do a mix of follow-up interviews and looking at the data? Because correlation is not causation, so we actually need to figure out whether these programs actually eliminate the need for a car, and it's not just easing transit payments and the burden, but also service delivery. So what sort of service deliveries need to be added because people are traveling at certain hours of the day, similar to the SEPTA question. So just curious for your thoughts on that. Do follow-on interviews actually result in service changes, saying that, hey, we need the bus to run at 5 a.m. because that's when I actually need to get to work. So
yeah, so one of this is the question of compliance and validation of data when you give people an incentive not to drive and actually validating that they didn't drive and they did something else is a challenge for these programs. What we did for this small pilot with 300 people is we had people submit a picture and a number of their odometer of their second car, of both cars. They had to, or 3 cars, if they identified they had 3 cars, they had to submit the odometer readings and a picture of the odometer for all of those cars. And shout out to Duke Center for Advanced Hindsight. We worked with this behavioral economics kind of think tank. They did a lot of some of the manual and thinking about how do we ask people for some of the data so that we can follow up. We also did issue $50 credit on a promo code on a tap card. So we actually have some of that data. If people did redeem the $50 on a transit card, it created an account in the back end and we can look at their transit ridership. We're still actually doing some analysis of that. So data to come. And I didn't share the slide, but a lot of the mode shift we actually saw in walking and biking, right? Because we happen to do this in Santa Monica. Santa Monica as a city is a very, especially compared to other cities in LA County. And it's beautiful and sunny, right? Great climate most of the year. It's a great place to walk and bike. And there's, lots of good kind of mixing of in terms of land use. It's a lot of great kind of mixed land use where you can kind of walk or bike to the grocery store or the drugstore or even a hospital, right? It's got a lot to offer. So we saw a lot more probably shift to walking and biking, which is harder to validate, right? We need to give people some kind of GPS app or something like that, which, compliance and using it, we've been experimenting, but been struggling with that. So we did validate that they didn't drive, actually looking at which modes and how much of those modes they switched to. We use surveys, weekly surveys, and we're going to follow up with them 3 months afterwards to see if that actually stuck. But yeah, right now we're kind of thinking about if we scale this up, do we have to have telematic devices in people's cars?
Yeah, OBD,
to really, do we work with an insurance company? Do we just do pictures and do, would love people, if anybody has ideas on this, we probably will release some kind of RFP on this because it is how do you make it user friendly so people actually want to participate, right? And it's not, yes, this is still going to be a research pilot, but it's going to be, if you're going to scale it up to several thousand people in LA County, how do you make it so there's compliance, but it's still user friendly? And I think that's the balance, right?
Yeah, I mean, an OBD-based telematics device probably be the easiest, or just having a coordination with the usage-based insurance policy that they already have and are submitting data there, just get data from that. Yeah, we're at time, so I'm going to pass the forum on to Genoa. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's such a warm conversation there. We'll continue for another hour or so. So we'll compile the question from the chat, share with the panelists. Hopefully you can give us some more written response that we'll summarize and share with the broader audience, right? So thanks to Dr. Anson Stewart for organizing and moderating the session again. I thank Ruth, Avi, and Lilly for the brilliant presentation and conversation. Everybody for joining. Thank the panel here.